The story that I wanted to tell is just a little bit of one version of how did we get here, and just quickly tracing through, coming out of the 90s and into the 2000s, this groundswell around local regional food and starting really at the direct market level. And we saw even in the comments now how continuing relevant and important the direct market, direct connection with farmers and communities is. And that really was codified and supported with federal dollars in a significant way coming through the 2008 Farm Bill. But as that was happening, the interest in supporting local regional producers and small and medium producers and helping folks to get more of a percentage of the dollar led to expansion of a diversity of markets. And as folks tried to enter different markets as small and medium-sized producers, food hubs emerged as a way to connect those dots and get the food from A to B and connect the needs of various buyers and consumers with what the producers were able and interested in doing. And that really landed in terms of the federal recognition of support as we moved into the 2014 Farm Bill and the creation of the local food promotion program. And well, part of what was interesting as the food hubs started to evolve was, it was clear at the beginning that the hard infrastructure needed the trucks and the warehouses and everything that it takes to actually physically move the food was important. But as time went on and through a couple of specific examples, it became clear that the relational and connecting the dots work that eventually we started thinking and talking about as value chain coordination was important and relevant already within the food hub world, and that expanding our sense of what a food hub could be to emphasize some of that soft infrastructure was relevant. And some of you may have seen the introduction of this session in the catalyst that goes out to the Food Systems Leadership Network. We did hope to and expect to, for a little while, have Jim Barham from USDA with us. And he was one of the person who carried a lot of water throughout these stages of development and helping folks to understand what a food hub was and could be and what it might try to be that might be a problem and how to avoid some of those risks that were known, and really carrying it through all the way into championing the value chain coordination work as well. And we'll hear more about that. But one of the things that he said as he was looking at the development of food hubs and trying to support it was that the business Red Tomato really made an impression on him. And part of the reason was that they had taken on a model where they didn't really have trucks and they didn't own a lot of infrastructure. They were kept that sort of capital expenditures overhead relatively low, but they were still playing a big role in moving local food and helping it to move. And so he felt like, well, if we're going to say all the things that a food hub could be, what is that spectrum of food hub definitions, including that felt important and important to mirror. And one of the things that was interesting to me as I heard this come up, because I had the same thought when we were planning the call, I started talking about Red Tomato. So I got Michael Rosine on the phone, who was the executive director of Red Tomato at the time. He's still involved with them, but is supporting Angel Mendez in that role now and for a while. But at the beginning, before all of this happened, they actually were your typical hard infrastructure brick and mortar food hub, and they were growing really quickly. They had almost $1 million of sales. And if you've seen any of like the benchmarking work that Jim Matson did a few years ago, that $1 million mark can be like a magic number in some folks' mind for moving towards minimum efficient scale and maybe profitability. And they were running as fast as they could. They were doing nonprofit programmatic activities, and they were growing sales, new customers, expanding existing customers, and they were exhausted. And then they started to do the math, and not everybody does, but if you pencil it out, like, well, what is the minimum efficient scale? How big do we need to be to really cash flow? And like, it might be $2 million. Well, it might be $5 million. And then they might be like, we're going to be dead by the time we're servicing $5 million of sales to get it. And they decided to pause and take a breath. And, a lot of food hubs live in that narrative, and some folks might burn out, some folks might hit a wall financially, some folks might figure out a way to turn a corner. Now, some of the ones like that we look at in this Food LINC project, also happen to have a retail operation generating millions of dollars of revenue. And so that's a different kind of breathing room as well. But in the case of Red Tomato, they did something that I think was a real gift to all of us today, which was to pause and say, wait a second, is this the only way to do this? Might we do this differently? And that's where they reached this decision to take a risk on being a more brokerage-oriented food hub and still moving the food and still championing local, but without the trucks on the road and all of those costs and also all of that exhaustion. And so thank goodness they did, because A, they're here today. B, that really informed things. And I see Debbie Trapa's on the call, so I just want to go to something that I wasn't going to share just in the interest of time, but I really want to emphasize the folks that have put the energy and the thought into getting us where we are today. And so all that I was just saying in this red tomato story magically starts to appear in language like USDA's working definition of food hubs circa 2012 with two magical words: actively manages. A food hub is a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source identified food products. And it goes on from there. But the thing that's important there is that it opens a door to folks to see a range of different ways to do this. And it doesn't mean that you have to put yourself out of business in order to try to help the farmer get from, some very small percentage of the dollar to maybe 60, 80 plus cents on the dollar. And so thank you, Debbie, for that. And so from there, Jim and others started to realize that as much as this relationship building and connecting of the dots is important in the food hub world, it's also its own kind of thing. And that can help hubs that may be focusing solely on some of this moving the food and the money, which is a lot of work. And so as we started to move towards the end of the Obama administration, Secretary Vilsack, because of some personnel changes, ended up being more directly involved in some of the thinking about the local regional work and put a challenge to folks and said, look, if you could do one thing in the next couple of years that we haven't done yet that's important, what would you do? And having gone through this whole process of building up and championing food hubs and recognizing the importance of actively managing as a valid way of doing this work, Jim Barham said, look, I'd really like to see if we can center and emphasize the value of value chain coordination. And that led to the opportunity to create the program Food LINC that Sarah's going to say a little bit more, that worked with a series of value chain coordinators of different types around the country, with some philanthropic funding support, with some leadership from USDA to drive the recognition of the value and to get things rolling. And all of the learnings from that informed what we later saw in the creation of the regional food business centers. And although Jim was doing other things, he involved deeply in analytics work and other things at USDA. When that ARPA legislation was passed and USDA was creating the architecture for the RFBCs, Jim came out and helped Christina Connell with some of the thinking of how to design and build this out. And in the center of his thinking was this value chain coordination theme. So it's no accident that we're having this conversation today, and with our community who is doing this work on the ground, trying to reinforce and connect the dots of how this can be an asset in the regional food business centers as they roll out. So just wanted to connect those dots briefly, and hopefully that sets the stage on some of the remarks that Sarah's going to share. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, and getting ready to hand things off to Sarah. So Sarah Rocker's National Program Lead at USDA's Institute of Food and Infrastructure, NIFA, and really excited to hear her remarks. And I do want to go to Debbie before we go to Sarah. And so Sarah, get ready, and let's go to Debbie.
So first of all, thank you for the shout out. It was really very nice. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention, and that was sort of maybe not so obvious in our thinking and our research products, but which became a recurrent theme, and I'm sure many of you saw this, is the succession issue. Because a lot of the nonprofits, I mean, whether or not you're dealing with food system issues or not, sometimes there's an issue with respect to cult of personality. You have someone who's a very strong leader who can really champion a cause. And when that person leaves for whatever reason, often some of the organizations have floundered. And I just think it's so important, in addition to what I think you astutely mentioned, Eric, about, constantly looking at re-examining your business model. It's also who is going to be in charge? How are the roles and responsibilities delineated? And do you have enough staff to carry out your function? Because sometimes I think people are growing too fast. They don't account for the labor. I mean, there's the excitement of being a startup, and but often it's sort of that, the mid, what was I going to say, just a nonprofit, or that's been in place or for say 5 to 7 years, where you see the real struggle. And it's the importance of managing that from both a labor resource, and I think a strategic point of view. That's really important. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much for that. And I'll just build on that super quickly with two themes. I don't know if any of you folks have ever done a succession planning process, but it's really fun. So I encourage you, if you're a leader who, and everybody's going to exit at some point in time. It's like talking with an entrepreneur on day one about, well, what's your exit strategy? Like, it can't hurt to think about it even now. But once you get into it as a leader, from my experience with it, that you learn so much, and it builds such a bond with folks who are coming on. And the last point that I'll make is that one of the things that Jim helped to inform, and Debbie was in the loop on this as well, was a food hub management program that ran starting in 2014 at University of Vermont. And one of the things that we assumed when we think about, well, who's going to come to this program, we think it's going to be those lead people, the managers of the food hubs. And what we found as we launched it was that the most value, the audience that was getting the most value out of this and the decisions that were being made on the ground was to send staff who are emerging leaders that supports this whole notion. And so I think it's a great point. Thank you for emphasizing that, Debbie.
Sure.
And Sarah, if you're ready, I'm happy to go to you.
I am, thanks. Well, I first want to address the community of practice, because it's been quite a while since I've been on, and it's lovely to see the growth of this over the past several years. Whether this is your first call or your 20th, I just want to sort of name that I feel like today's topic is a bit of a family tree of the lineage of the thought leaders and the policy practitioners and the on-the-boots ground folks who have actually elevated and invested in and gotten value chain coordination to the place that it is, both at the ground level and also the federal funding level. And so whether this is your first time here or you've been doing this for years, I hope that there's takeaways from everyone about the, just the many hats that have been in the ring for quite a while. And may you leverage that history to embolden you and empower you to take advantage of the new funding, knowing that it's not novel. It's actually it's been developed for quite some time. And I just want to start by naming both my appreciation to Debbie, who I think has been an absolute force in the U.S. Department of Agriculture in implementing and helping to shepherd the programs. Jim, who couldn't be here, also worked very closely with her. And then a few other just personal mentors for me in the theory and the work. Ken Meter, for your interrogation of the linearity of chains, helping us to think about webs and networks, and always bringing beautiful complexity. And then also Shanna Ratner, who has really developed so much of the undergirding theory that Jim used for Food LINC, which is the WealthWorks model. So a place-based economic development model takes into account multiple capitals. And beyond that, Shauna also does what I would call a reciprocal framework for evaluation called You Get What You Measure. So answering some of those questions there. Those are just a few of the greats that are in the room who don't have the stage today. I hope that they get interviewed at a upcoming VCC CoP call. So with that, I'll just say I'm Sarah Rocker, and some of you may know me from my work as like an on-the-ground practitioner back in the early mid-2000s in the Pacific Northwest as a farmer, doing food cooperatives, doing institutional purchasing, farmers market president and manager, and food policy council originators. From that, I got into academia because I just knew a little bit too much about the problems of the food system that I wanted to be a bit more dangerous. And I did a PhD in rural sociology over at Penn State. It was from that perspective that I got to engage with the USDA projects in a longitudinal study for my own dissertation. And that's how I'm going to speak to you today about what did we learn from some of the iterations of the USDA programs that came before, and how can we help equip you all with some good knowledge and frameworks to help just accelerate and launch the current opportunities that exist for us, in particular with RFSI and RFBC. So with that, just have a few slides here to share, and I'm going to share my screen right now. And here we go. Does everyone see this? Hopefully. Thank you. So again, just to allude to what Eric was saying, this is like going back to the 2016 when the USDA really wanted to invest in people power. And they did it by choosing these 13 communities where there was already some traction in the world going on, or in the world, I say in our domestic world going on. And they gave money to fund people power, to do the connecting work, to stitch together the missing soft infrastructure that we knew was so critically important. And the mechanism for doing so was articulated in a series of roles that coordinators, value chain coordinators, would perform. And again, here's some early days, USDA Wallace Center publications here on what is this project, leveraging investment through network coordination, and what are the roles that these value chain coordinators have to do. Again, borrowing a lot from the WealthWorks, the Ford Foundation work that came before this, and work that happened beyond the food landscape, but they applied it to food in the 2016 to 2018 era. I came in as a longitudinal researcher and studied the impact of this, both using social network analysis on how relationships across buyers and suppliers, as well as the support networks, were formed. And I also interrogated the heck out of a lot of these value chain coordinators that were selected, Sue Beckwith being one of them. So it's really awesome to have her on this call as well today. And what do we learn? I'm going to just jump ahead and give you like top 5 lessons that we've learned from Food LINC in like 2 minutes. So first is there's more roles, than just those 6 that was initially articulated. And in fact, there's even way more roles than this. These are just the ones that came up in those 3 years. And I took a stab at kind of articulating some more of the roles that I saw in the Food LINC program. I also took a stab at suggesting that there's a bit of a hierarchy to roles. Roles change all the time. But these top primary roles are ones that really affect people in the chain itself. So if you're a producer, a seller, if you're buying product, those top roles really matter to you. Those system enabling roles maybe matter less direct service to the farmer, but they help lubricate the entire chain and even the entire economy and communities. So both are important, but there is about sort of a bread and butter, to the roles that I examined. And I can't wait for people to take this research and keep interrogating it, because as the food system landscape changes, as our world changes, the need for the roles change as well. But this is one really important thing that came out of it. The other is to shift the focus from a single coordinator to the idea that it's actually not about the person doing it, it's about the action. And specifically, it's about the shared action of the sharedness of who are performing these roles in a particular chain, in a particular community, in a particular economy. So what's more important is, again, moving it away from the individual that's selected or the individual nonprofit or whatever, and more about the roles need to be present in a food system or a chain or a community. So again, some really basic takeaways here. There's no one superhero that does all the roles. If you do, you're probably a great candidate for burnout. It's also really a not resilient model in terms of building a network, because we've seen this too often, that somebody would take on all the work, do all the connecting in their food system, and then they like move away. And then the system is fragmented again without them, or takes a big hit without them. So again, just some strategies here that moving away from that initial investment to one coordinator to rule them all. We don't want that. That's a good place to start. It's not a good place to end. We want to make sure that the roles are shared, that they're done so in partnership, and that really people play to their strengths about the roles that they can perform in the food system. So just to say a little bit more, building on what Eric shared, this really comes out of the idea that it doesn't matter how expensive your food hub is or how awesome your refrigerated truck is. If you don't have the soft infrastructure to make the hard infrastructure work, that hard infrastructure is going to go to waste. And so what do we mean by soft infrastructure? Loosely, and there's a lot of literature on this, it's about how people know each other, it's about levels of trust, it's about knowledge, cultural norms, and ultimately sort of broader networks. So another kind of articulation, again, that I wrote coming out of Food LINC is thinking about like an invisible scaffolding that you're building. And again, people articulate, so hard to demonstrate, so critical, right? It's a critical need, yet it's hard to demonstrate, and it's also hard to get funding for. I attempted to use, and some others do this as well, some modeling, some network analysis where you actually kind of model the infrastructure that you're building. That's pretty laborious, but it's a good thing to know that things like that exist out in the world. And I'm sure there's more recent literature on that. Dawn Thilmany's here as well. She is an editor of a food systems book that is on like the latest and greatest of all food systems evaluation and modeling. So tap her if you want to know more. I'm sure she could plug you in. So again, to go back to the strategy and how this gets us to our present day, this is some early Food LINC language here, that what's needed is all of these people in a chain, specifically a value chain or a transactional chain to get connected, and that there's like a coordinator who's going to be doing it all. And again, my work sort of interrogates that based on what I saw and what I interviewed of these people who were getting funded during Food LINC, that actually it's not just one chain of transactional actors. You do need to forge buying and selling agreements along the chain, but you also need to connect those transactional actors to this wealth of ecosystem of nonprofits, policy, research, who are trying to give valuable resources to these farmers, food hubs, processors, et cetera. So there's really two dimensions, at least, of value chain coordination along the chain and then up and down to support resources in the community as well as to the broader food system. So again, who coordinates? I won't get into that totally, but I can just say it's everyone's job to coordinate. And what's important is that the work is shared, because the more people that share in the work and maintain the health of the chain and see a role in being a network weaver, the more resilient that the network is going to be and the chain is going to be. I use chain and network interchangeably. Again, homage to Ken Meter, who helps us complexify that. So this brings us to the last slide, and I'm going to hand it over to those who are doing the work. Where we are in this present moment is this amazing opportunity where we've seen the articulation that yes, federal funding is going out to fund not just individual coordinators anymore, but consortiums, particularly geographic regional consortiums, starting with LFPP kind of in order, then Regional Food Systems Partnership, now the Regional Food Business Centers and Regional Food Systems Infrastructure. This is years in the making to get this language of value chain coordination and shared coordination in these RFAs. And it is such an amazing win for us to all be here today. So I invite us all now to just think about where we've come and where we might go based on the lessons we've learned from years past. Thanks so much.
So thank you, Sarah. So let's see if we can go back, and I'm sorry if I'm not seeing a slide that's up there. Are we back in our slides, Pete?
We will be in just a minute here.
Yeah, no rush.
There we go.
Talk without pictures. So I think it's really important to ground this in the work of the folks who are leading the charge as the regional food business centers get rolling. And I know there's several folks from various centers, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time. And I know a lot of other folks are out there working hard to connect the dots across the centers, which, as Sarah highlighted, is really crucial as well. But we have the honor today of having Sue Beck with us, the executive director of the Texas Center for Local Food, and she's also playing a strong role in helping to shape the Delta Regional Food Business Center. And we have Rock Woods, the project director of that center, with us today. So we're going to take a little bit of time to hear about what's important and how value chain coordination can help from their perspective. So I'll hand it to Sue.
Great. Hi. Can you make the share screen go away? I'm just going to chat. I've come to these VCC COPs kind of regularly, so I'm just sort of used to us just kind of chatting away. I'm Sue Beckwith. I work for the Texas Center for Local Food. We were founded by a small group of farmers in Central Texas to look at market development in just before 2016 and to really focus from the farm gate out. How can we educate consumers? How can we develop markets? I was speaking earlier in a small group with someone from Hawaii, and I honestly think Texas probably has as many small vegetable farmers as Hawaii does. And that's very interesting, right? So we have a lot of work to do in Texas. We were honored to be a part of Food LINC, which I think Jim always called it an initiative. It wasn't a program, it was initiative. And I just want to kind of repeat the shout out to Deborah and others in this space, and Jim. to thank you to AMS for being just a standout agency among other government agencies. Now, admittedly, sometimes the bar is low, but AMS, okay, but AMS is willing to support our ideas and to listen to us, those of us in this room and others, to build a new food system. I often say the existing food system isn't broken. It works perfectly well for those it was designed to work for. What we're building is something new that draws upon the best of that and builds something new alongside of it. And if not to extend the metaphor too far, but remember, there was never a campaign against the landline. A new way of doing things came about, and the old ways fell into disuse. So I would just encourage you to sort of think in terms of that paradigm of building something new, and a little maybe less sometimes, and working against and build toward. So that's my little intro. I won't take up a lot of time. We were honored to be a part of Food LINC. It really kicked us off as an organization and gave us a few resources to really begin to understand what is value chain coordination work and what is our role in it. We don't run a food hub. We don't ourselves move food and money. And yet that is the vector that we aim for every day. I'm an advocate of planning, and we had a conversation this past week to prepare. I will say, yes, we need a plan, and yes, we need a framework, and we need a vector. So we need to understand our own why. Why are we doing this, and how do we recognize when we're successful? And thank you to whoever put the book link in the chat earlier. I'm going to certainly have a look at that. And so our vector for us at the Texas Center for Local Food is moving food and money to develop equitable food systems that give everybody access to healthy local food in Texas. Big aspirational vision, but that's what we're aiming for, whether we're supporting farmers markets and producers selling at them through our text-fed online training platform, or doing direct technical assistance for farmers to develop business plans and understand who they're going to sell to, how much are they going to sell, and so forth. What's their sustainable business model going to be? I think, when I think about Food LINC, and Sarah, thank you. Sarah's network diagrams were just wild in the early days of Food LINC. I want to also talk about the importance of convening in person. It's just really valuable to it's easier, at least for me, I don't know about y'all, but easier for me to let myself be a little bit vulnerable if I've kind of met you and hung out with you a little while. And then I can just sort of let here's the thing I think I really am terrible at. I can share that, and then maybe you're good at that, and we can then learn from one another. And I think that was a big benefit I got from those Wallace Center convenings around Food LINC. They were great. And I realize those of you from USDA, I know they're very expensive, but I do think that the return on investment is substantial from those face-to-face interactions. I think that I'm really excited about the business centers, and I'm just pleased as punch to be working with Rock and the other folks from the Delta region states. I was a startup manager for two fairly large food businesses here in Texas. Jeremiah Cunningham's World's Best Eggs, which sells certified organic pasture-raised eggs to all Whole Food stores across the southwestern United States. And I was able to be the startup manager for the first commercial organic feed mill in Texas, which is a pivotal business, right? Because now, 10 years later, between 2 and 250 farms rely on that component of the supply chain. It goes away, they go away the next day, just like that. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of funding in the business centers, and at least for us in Texas, we have to be really strategic about where we make these business builder investments. And Rock and I have talked about this, looking for the early wins and then finding a way to bring along the beginners, connecting them, hopefully in in-person convenings with those early winners. How can we do that? So I think the foundation of what we've learned in Food LINC is really critical, because it did teach us about the soft skills that we need. The next step, I think, is to develop business skills. I think that's the biggest gap that I've seen, is in just among my colleagues is not very many of us have had the opportunity to start businesses. And when you look around that circle of what's in the supply chain, well, they're pretty much all businesses. And so those of us helping establish robust regional food supply chains need that expertise to understand what's it take to start a business. What is cash flow? What's a financial statement? How do I read it? How do I project out? In the case of Red Tomato, that's exactly what they did when they paused. They said, well, wait a minute. Do we really need to own our own trucks? Well, no, as it turns out, they didn't, but they had to run some numbers and do some business analysis in order to determine that. So I think going forward, at least I think for us, and Rock will speak for him and the other folks in the Delta, is to really look at developing the business skills within ourselves and bringing in folks into the business centers that can help us hit that key piece, which is equitable food systems that support values-based businesses. And that's what makes the food chain hum like a what? Like a clock, like a something. So that's what I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions whenever that's appropriate.
Yeah, we're going to open it up shortly. Why don't we hand it off to Rock? And Rock, really appreciate your being with us today, and with the unique position you're in, both with building out the Regional Food Business Center and then also being the catalyst for bringing value chain coordinators into the mix. And I'm sure other Regional Food Business Center leaders are in a similar role. So your perspectives are a great addition to the conversation. So let's hand it off to Rock.
Right. Yeah, my name is Raquel Woods, and I work for Mississippi Delta Council for Farm Workers Opportunities Incorporated. And one of the things that our organization did, well, still does, is to educate a lot of the small limited resource farmers in agriculture, kind of advancing their life and helping them to develop agriculture skills, basically a lot of education. So when we wrote to the opportunity of getting the Regional Food Business Center started, it was a great opportunity because at the time we knew that a lot of our limited resource farmers had poor buyer access that would limit them to actually having processors or having buyers to actually buy a lot of their produce or meats that they had available. And as Sue mentioned earlier, that we've had several conversations about getting the win, and we don't want this grant to seem like, oh, well, USDA is just doing it for the same producers again. So we want to be able to expand the access so that all farmers, even limited resource farmers, have an opportunity to actually start a business and actually include a lot of the other smaller producers to get them involved in getting their produce harvested, sold during post-harvest. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier in the beginning that really got my wheels turning. Well, will that be through regional food business centers? Will that be, and Josh and I talked about it in our meetings, will there be opportunities for farmers to be able to receive food safety trainings? And that was a great idea because a lot of our limited resource farmers and producers do not have that particular food safety training. And that's some of the dialogue that we want to get across to them, that in order for you to be successful, you want that business to move forward, you need to know how and what's good to sell and what's not good, what's available, what to send to the processor, how to get the processor's attention, selling good quality produce and having good quality meat if you're going to have it processed, and just finding that niche. So a lot of the TA will be focused on that. Another thing that we thought about it, will it be only for one person, or how can we get a group of people involved in this? Because in order to get this to producers that have limited access or producers that don't understand how to access or to build their businesses around this, we want to be able to have access for them to be able to do this through the TA assistance. And multiple things that we're going to need. We're going to be hiring value chain coordinators, because one of the things that's important is as we build those regional food business centers, we want those value chain coordinators to be able to tie a lot of the producers' produce and meats into the value chain. Because one of the things we want to be able to capture is that, in our description, was that 2% of the food that stays within these particular 5 states that we cover, which are Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, and East Texas. And we got partners in all of those states that are geared towards helping build these businesses. Now, we're in the process of building that application, to whereas the 5 states that we're applying, that's going to be applying to these biz builders, and we're going to beta test that, because what grows in Mississippi or what happens in Mississippi are not the same in other states. So we're trying to figure out how that application can tailor to each state, which is important because, I made the mistake of, thinking, just one way, which is Mississippi, that I was there. And then I had to think about it when I was in meetings, and Sue, reminded me of multiple different things. I said, well, let me stop thinking Mississippi. Let me think let me figure out how Texas, how Louisiana work, how Arkansas works, because I'm thinking everything in the South is the same, but we have producers that grow multiple different things that could add to this. So those value chain coordinators are going to be important for us to be able to lead the charge, to help identify some of the things that we can put into these businesses that could actually grow this out, because we want this to be back in the Farm Bill for the next 5 years or 10 years so that we could grow this out. Because a lot of the things that we know what's coming forward, the artificial meat that's being grown, but we want the local stuff that people are growing and producing to have access to the market, to be circulated around, food here in the states that we're covering. So we're going to be having positions that's going to be open. We're still in the process of putting that out. We're getting our web page up. It's up, but we're going to add more to it. We're hiring people that's going to be able to be a communications person, a business plan developer person. We're in the process of putting all of that out. We're still working with USDA, because at the same time, we're building capacity for a small nonprofit that hadn't had access to a lot of this. So bear with us as we build the capacity to this organization. And I've been in agriculture, and I've been a farmer myself for over 20 plus years. And I understand how farming works. I understand how, the educational side works. And I've worked with mostly limited resource growers and producers my entire life. I grew up as one. So that's all I have for now. If you have any questions that, we can all address, I'd be happy to address those questions.
Great. Well, let's open it up. Thanks so much, Rob.
The link, and it's a 5-part series on value chain coordination with all the, I would say distilled, but actually more than what Sarah shared today, taught by Sarah Rocker and Elliott Smith, as well as other guests that shared their perspective as value chain coordinators. And it's self-paced. There are 10 to 20-minute videos for each of the 5 modules, as well as resources. So feel free to use that. And especially folks that are new to this role, there's a lot you could ramp up quickly just by learning some of the fundamentals through that course. And then we're going to highlight this is a new offering from the Food Systems Leadership Network, racial affinity spaces, that came as a request from network members, and they're ongoing through June. They've already started, but anyone can join through the Pete, if you could put the link to register. I don't have that, but you can join if you identify with any of these groups, and there's a page that shares more about how these run, as well as the facilitators. But that's something we're offering now. We'll see how it goes, and then hope to offer more if there's appetite for it. And then, as always, the discussion group is open for questions or comments on VCC. And what I've seen on this over the years is that if you have a technical question, you want to talk about software or packaging or something like that, it's a great place for that, because people can just chime in and you can get a wealth of responses right away. So encourage, especially those, any type of question, but especially those you can put there. And with, looks like it's got over, I think it's over 300 members at this point. We'll see it and be able to respond. So those are some of the resources. And thank you to all the speakers for joining today, for Sarah, Raquel, and Sue for sharing, and showing the importance of this role and how it's evolved over time. And I think with the evolution of the regional food business centers and all the investment, there's going to be more people doing value chain coordination, more funding for it. And so just the more support and shared learning we can do, the better.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone for being with us today. We are just about at time. If anybody has a burning closing comment, feel free to let us know. But otherwise, I just want to thank again all of the speakers and the time that they put in to help coordinate and plan for this, and hope this is relevant. And as you can see with Rock's work, he's literally bringing value chain coordinators directly into the work of that RFBC as we speak. And whether that's happening in the Northeast Center that may be supporting some of the folks that are on the call with some of the questions. Really encourage you to find out what the Regional Food Business Center in your region is, if you're not already working with them or partnering with them, to get in the loop. I know the Northeast one just did a quarterly call a week or so ago, and there's interesting and novel things developing at each one. And I really love Sarah's point about the potential for communication across the regional food business centers. And I know we've got some various national support organizations that have been working to help connect the dots between the RFBCs, and I know USDA stands behind that intent as well. So thank you all for all that you're doing to make local food affordable and accessible, and healthy food to all in your area. And I really think we're in the middle and really just towards the beginning of a really exciting moment with this program. So great to be with you and to join in helping to shape the impact of this current moment with you.
Thanks all. Good to see you.